My name is Nadia. I was born just outside of Boston, but most of what I remember comes from upstate New York, the cold kitchens, the smell of cigarettes, and the sound of a man's boots coming down the hallway. My father was an artist, a heroin addict, and my mother was 19 when she ran away with him. She used to tell people it was love, but even as a child, I could feel that what lived between them wasn't love, it was chaos. It was a storm that never stopped. The first time my father hurt me, I was too young to even know what the word hurt meant. I was 2, maybe 3. I remember colors before faces, the yellow walls, the red couch, the smell of paint and sweat. I remember his voice whispering my name, and the way my body felt like it wasn't mine. I used to tell people, I told anyone who would listen, babysitters, Sunday school teachers, even the mailman once. I'd say, I don't like when Daddy touches me. But people would just smile, pat my head, or look away. They didn't know what to do with the truth of a small child. My mother knew, and she stayed. She even helped him hide. When the police came, she'd push him into this hidden hallway in our apartment, a space between the walls where he'd disappeared until they were gone, and I'd watch her lie calm and certain, like it was the most natural thing in the world to protect the man who was destroying her children. After a while, she started bringing other little girls from the building over to take baths with me, because he liked to watch. I didn't understand it then, but I knew it made my stomach hurt. I knew that after those baths, I'd feel like something inside me had disappeared. When I was 5, I had surgery. They said it was because of an infection, a problem with my bladder and urethra. But the truth is, the damage was from what he did to me. There are things a doctor can fix and things they can't. They stitched me up, but no one touched the parts that were really broken. That by the time I was 7, we had moved again from Boston to Rochester, back and forth like fugitives. My mother's family would come to take her home, but he'd call, and she'd go right back. It was like she was addicted to him, the same way he was addicted to heroin. I learned early that love meant pain, that safety was a story people told their children to help them sleep. One summer day, I was outside playing when a man across the street asked if I could babysit his daughter. I felt proud. I was 7 and wanted to be grown. He took me upstairs, into the attic. The light was thin and dusty. He said he'd give me a room like his daughter's, with pink curtains and a big bed, if I stayed quiet. When he touched me, something in me froze. I remember thinking, he's doing what Daddy did. And in that moment, I knew exactly what to do. Nothing. You stay still. You don't fight. You survive. He threatened to kill my family if I told, but the first chance I had, I ran. I ran barefoot across the street and screamed to my mother. He did what Daddy did. For a second, I thought she might finally protect me. She called her brothers, and they beat him so badly, he ended up in the hospital. There was a trial, a rape kit. I stood in court, small and shaking, telling a room full of adults what he'd done. No one ever told me what happened after. If he went to jail, if he just disappeared, I don't know. I only remember the way their faces looked when I spoke, like I was making them uncomfortable, like I was ruining something polite. When I was 8, my mother met another man. She married him, and that became the next chapter of my life, the one where the beatings began. He was tall, 6'5", with a voice that filled every room. He hit my brother until he peed himself. He made my sister and me do things I can't even say out loud. He'd hold us down, make us touch him, whisper that if we told anyone, he'd kill us all. My mother knew. She always knew. She'd pretend not to see, pretend to believe his stories, that we were bad kids, that we needed discipline. He had a belt with metal studs. Sometimes, when he was done, the holes on our skin matched the pattern of the belt. I learned not to cry. I learned to disappear even while I was standing right there. We were never allowed to touch food from the fridge. We were always hungry. Sometimes, he'd pee in soda cans and put them inside the refrigerator, just to watch us drink it by mistake. By the time I turned 14, I was an expert in pretending to sleep when he came in, pretending the bruises were from falling, pretending the house was normal when teachers asked why I looked tired, pretending that love was supposed to hurt this much. My stepfather ran our house like a prison. Every sound had a consequence: a glass placed too hard on the counter, a door not shut right, a laugh that lasted too long. I learned to walk on the edges of the floorboards that didn't creak. My sister and I used to communicate through looks, tiny glances that meant, don't speak now, he's listening. Sometimes, at school, I'd catch my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognize myself. My hair was tangled, my eyes dull. I looked older than the other girls, not because of years, but because of weight. The kind of weight you can't see but can't put down either. At 15, I started working small jobs, babysitting, cleaning houses, just to stay out of the apartment. One afternoon, I came home and found my sister locked in her room, crying. The door was jammed. When she finally opened it, I saw her arms covered in welts. She said he'd come in while I was gone, that he'd used one of his belts again, the studded one, the same one he used on me that night. I sat on the edge of my bed and decided, if I stayed, I'd die. Maybe not right away, but slowly, in pieces. I'd already lost most of myself, my childhood, my safety, my ability to trust anyone. The only thing left was my will to live. So I started planning, not escape exactly, more like survival. I joined the high school cheerleading team because it meant staying late after school, for 2 hours each day. I wasn't his property. I could run, jump, laugh. I could feel air in my lungs again. My mother would come to some of the games. She'd sit in the bleachers, quiet, pretending we were a normal family. I remember looking up at her once and realizing she would never save us. The idea that a mother would protect her children didn't apply to mine. One evening, after practice, I came home late. The house was silent, too silent. My sister's door was locked again. I heard muffled crying, then something heavy fall. When she opened the door, her eyes were blank. Her collarbone was bruised, her mouth bleeding. I wanted to scream, but she grabbed my arm and whispered, "Don't, please don't." Something in me broke that night. Not the kind of break that heals. It was the death of hope. The next day, I went to school like nothing had happened. That's what trauma teaches you, how to keep moving while carrying the dead inside you. At 16, I tried to take my own life for the first time. Pills, mostly. I remember lying on the bathroom floor, the tiles cold against my cheek, and thinking, at least it's quiet here. But my sister found me and made me throw up. She held me for hours after, whispering, "You can't leave me here alone." So I stayed. For her, I started writing letters to myself, small notes on scraps of paper I'd hide under the mattress. They said things like, "You are still here. You are not just what was done to you." I didn't believe them then, but I think part of me needed to see those words anyway. There was one thing that always helped me breathe. Art. I would draw on anything I could find. Napkins, notebook covers, old envelopes. People think art is about beauty, but for me it was about control. I could decide where the lines went. I could make something that didn't hurt me back. When I turned 17, I had enough courage to tell my mother everything. I told her about the nights, the bruises, the things he made us do. I told her about the belt, the blood, the smell of him that still clung to my skin. She didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised. Instead, she called him into the room. She said, "They have something to tell you." He looked at me, calm, almost bored. When I started to speak, he cut me off. "You girls lie," he said. "You always lie." And my mother nodded. That was the moment I realized she chose him over us. Fully, consciously, without hesitation. That night, I packed a few clothes and a toothbrush into a paper bag. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't sleep under that roof again. I slept in a park near the river, under a streetlight that hummed all night. I remember watching the water move and thinking, if I can make it till morning, maybe I can make it to 18. Morning came, and I was still alive. That felt like a victory. I found a job cleaning tables at a diner. The owner was kind, never asked questions. I'd come in early to wipe counters, my hands trembling, my mind somewhere far away. Every clatter of dishes made me flinch, but at least I was free. People like to say that freedom feels light. To me, it felt heavy, like carrying a new kind of loneliness I didn't yet know how to name. When I was 17 and a half, I found out I was pregnant. I remember sitting in the clinic bathroom, staring at the test, and thinking, I don't even know what safety feels like. How can I give it to someone else? But I also knew this: I would never let anyone touch my child the way they touched me, so I kept the baby. That was the day my survival stopped being about me. When I was 18, I gave birth to my daughter in a small county hospital, with peeling paint and a broken heater. It was snowing outside, the kind of storm that makes the whole world quiet. I remember thinking, she's never going to know that kind of silence, the one that means danger. Her cry was small, sharp, like it was cutting through the years I'd been muted. I held her close, and for the first time, I felt something clean move through me. a promise, a pulse that belonged only to love. But love doesn't erase the past, it just gives it new corners to hide in. After she was born, I stayed with a friend for a while, sleeping on her couch, living off instant noodles and free clinic visits. My body healed, but my mind didn't. Every sound at night made me jolt awake. Every man's voice on TV felt like a warning. My mother didn't call. Not once. She knew I had a baby. She just didn't care. I started working nights at a laundromat. The machines became my lullaby, constant, predictable, mechanical. I liked the way they hummed. I liked that they didn't ask questions. I'd fold strangers' clothes and imagine who they belonged. Two families who laughed at dinner. People who had clean beginnings. When I was 19, I met someone older. He had a car, a job, and a smile that made me believe maybe life could be normal. I wanted that. I was so desperate for it that I didn't notice the red flags until they were wrapped around my throat. He was kind at first, gentle even. He said he loved that I was strong. But after a few months, that word started to sound like an accusation. He didn't like when I worked too late, didn't like when I wore lipstick, didn't like when I spoke to the man at the register. It took me years to understand that. One evening, I met a man who said he was different, and maybe he was for a while. He talked about God, about forgiveness, about how we could both heal. But soon, the same pattern began: isolation, anger, control. It's strange how trauma disguises itself as love when you're used to chaos. He used to tell me, "You're lucky I stay. Most men wouldn't." And I'd say, "You're right." That's what happens when you're raised by people who convinced you love must be earned through pain. You forget that peace is a right, not a reward. When I was 23, I left him too, this time with a toddler and nothing else. I found work in a hospital cleaning rooms. The smell of disinfectant was oddly comforting. The nurses were kind. They taught me small things: how to wrap wounds, how to change a bed with someone still in it, how to breathe slowly when fear came back like static. One night, while mopping the hallway, I felt dizzy. The world tilted. I woke up on the floor, staring at the fluorescent lights. They said it was stress, maybe a seizure. I remember thinking, my body finally caught up to my mind. After that, I started painting again. Nothing fancy, just shapes, colors, things that didn't demand words. I sold one painting for $50. It felt like a fortune. I was still poor, still haunted, but I was alive. Sometimes survival isn't a grand transformation. Sometimes it's just a series of small refusals. Refusing to die, refusing to stay silent, refusing to believe the worst thing that happened to you is the only thing you are. I didn't know it then, but I was already building a life. Brick by unglamorous brick. My daughter used to sit beside me while I painted, dipping her fingers in colors, making shapes that didn't mean anything but joy. And I'd think, maybe this is what healing looks like. Not loud, not dramatic, just a people making something that wasn't born from pain. When I turned 30, I had been running from my childhood for so long that it felt like part of my name. I was a mother, an employee, a woman who smiled at work and kept her apartment clean. But inside, I was still that small girl in the hidden hallway, holding her breath while the police knocked on the door. It's strange what time can't fix. Years pass. People change, but the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Every time a door slammed, my muscles tensed. Every time my daughter raised her voice, my heart raced. One morning, my sister called. I hadn't spoken to her in almost a decade. She said, "I'm starting therapy on Monday. I want you to come with me." My first instinct was to say no. Therapy meant digging, remembering, naming. It meant saying the things I'd survived out loud. I had built my life on silence. Breaking it felt dangerous. But something in her voice, soft, shaking, tired, made me say yes. The first session was brutal. The therapist was gentle, but she looked at me like she saw everything I'd tried to hide. She asked, "When was the first time you felt unsafe?" And I couldn't answer, because it wasn't one time. It was all the time. It was the air of my childhood, thick and unbreathable. After the session, I sat in my car and cried for the first time in years. Not the kind of crying that asks for comfort, just release. Like the grief had been waiting decades for permission to move. Therapy didn't fix me, but it gave me a language for what happened. And sometimes, naming the monster is the first step to shrinking it. My therapist said something that stayed with me. Survival is clever. Healing is brave. For most of my life, I had been clever. It was time to be brave. I started writing again, long letters I'd never send. To my mother, my father, the men who broke me. Some nights, I'd burn them in the sink and watch the smoke twist into the air. It wasn't forgiveness. It was release. My sister and I started meeting for coffee after therapy. The first few times, we mostly sat in silence. She'd stir her drink for minutes. We didn't last long. He wanted someone whole, and I was still learning how to be that. But I'm grateful for him. He showed me that gentleness could exist without control. And that was something new. As the years passed, I started painting more. My small apartment became a studio, canvases stacked against the wall, the smell of turpentine in the air. I'd paint late into the night, sometimes with tears dripping onto the canvas. It wasn't sadness, it was truth. One painting changed everything. It was a portrait of a girl sitting on the edge of a bathtub. Her reflection split between two mirrors. I didn't plan it that way, but when it was done, I realized it was me, the child and the woman, finally facing each other. I sold that painting, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was selling my pain. I was sharing my survival. Therapy continued. Some weeks, I didn't speak at all. Others, I couldn't stop. I told stories I'd buried for decades. I admitted I used to pray not for God to save me, but for me to stop existing. I admitted that sometimes, even now, I missed the version of my mother I invented, the one who might have loved me if she'd been someone else. Healing meant letting go of that fantasy. It meant accepting that she wasn't broken by what happened. She chose it. And I was done choosing her over myself. So I stopped calling. I stopped waiting for her birthday to pass and thinking maybe she'd reach out. I stopped writing letters I'd never send. Instead, I started writing to my daughter. Little notes taped to her mirror. You are safe. You are loved. You are enough. The words I needed once now belonged to her. At 35, I realized something I never expected. I was proud of myself, not because I'd become perfect or healed or unscarred, but because I'd stopped letting pain define the edges of my life. When I turned 40, I began to understand that survival doesn't end when the violence stops. It continues in quieter ways. Every decision, every relationship, every morning you choose to keep going. People assume healing feels like light. For me, it felt more like fog, slow, dense, revealing only what's right in front of you. My daughter was a teenager then. She looked nothing like me, which I was secretly grateful for. I wanted her to be untouched by my reflection, by the ghosts that built me. She loved music, laughter, life. Sometimes I'd watch her dance in the living room and think, I did that. I broke the chain. Still, there were moments that reminded me of the cracks inside. One day she slammed a door after an argument, and my body reacted before my mind could catch up. I ducked, heart racing, hands trembling. She looked at me like I was a stranger, and I realized trauma is a language your body never stops speaking, even when your mouth forgets the words. So I went back to therapy, not because I was falling apart, but because I wanted to stay together. My therapist asked, "When do you feel safe now?" I said, "When I'm painting, when I'm with my daughter, when no one needs me to explain." Those became my sacred spaces, small moments where survival turned into living. I started showing my art in small galleries. I never used my last name, just Nadia. Each piece was a story, childhood fragments, broken mirrors, faceless figures holding light. People would cry in front of them. They'd come up to me and whisper, "I've been there too." That's when I understood that what happened to me wasn't just mine. It belonged to 1,000 women who never got to speak. One of those women was my sister. After years apart, she finally left her own abusive marriage. She called me one night and said, "I did it. I'm free." We didn't talk for long. We didn't need to. Silence between survivors is sacred. It means, I understand. We started seeing each other more. Once a week, at a cafe near the ocean, we'd sit by the window, drinking red wine and sharing salad we never finished. The waiter learned our names. The light in that place was soft, golden, the kind of light that forgives. One evening, she said, "Do you ever think we're still those girls, hiding in that apartment?" I smiled. Maybe a little, but now, we get to leave whenever we want. She laughed through tears, and I realized healing isn't forgetting, it's remembering without losing yourself. A few years later, I was invited to speak at a women's center. I said yes, then panicked for weeks. How do you turn pain into words that don't drown the listener? That moment changed me. I realized that every time I spoke the truth, the shame got smaller. My mother is still alive. We haven't spoken in years. Sometimes I imagine what I'd say if we met again. Maybe nothing. Maybe I'd just look at her and think, You made your choices, and I made mine. I used to crave her apology. Now I just crave peace. My daughter is grown now, with a child of her own. The other day, she said, "Mom, you're the safest person I know." I cried quietly after she left, because that was the sentence I'd been waiting my whole life to hear. People often ask me if I've forgiven the men who hurt me. The truth is complicated. I don't think forgiveness is something you give for them, it's something you create for yourself. It's waking up and realizing they no longer get to control your heartbeat. When I paint now, I use light colors, pale yellows, soft blues, shades of calm I never knew existed before. I paint windows, open doors, women standing in the sun. I paint freedom the way I always imagined it, and I leave space, always space for air, for silence, for what's next. If I could talk to that 7-year-old girl again, the one who ran across the street screaming for her mother, I'd tell her this: you made it. No one saved you, but you're still here. And one day, you'll build a life so gentle it will feel like the opposite of everything you came from. To anyone watching this, to anyone who knows that kind of silence, you are not what was done to you. You are not broken beyond repair. You are not unworthy of love. If that's you, take one small truth and speak it, even if your voice shakes. Because secrets rot in the dark, but the moment you tell your story, light begins to grow.